from Los Angeles, Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison.
I've spent a decade taking a bite out of conspiracy theories, unraveling urban legends, and grappling with worldwide top secret issues.
I've even racked up some of their awards.
Wow, I mean, first of all, what a question.
Journalism is about telling the truth.
All while ferreting out the bottom line.
I'm a Harrison Hellraiser.
With me, Cary Harrison, as your guide.
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison.
And it is Rethinking Heroes, RethinkingHeroes.com, Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. Glad to have you aboard and welcome. Well, you can catch a video stream of this on every video streaming platform simply by going to RethinkingHeroes.com and clicking on the link of your choice. Now, the die has been cast, as we all know. The fate of our democracy hangs in the balance. The ascendancy of autocratic forces, emboldened by the recent election, threatens to sniff out the flickering flame of dissent. How's that for an alliteration? I love it when I just pull these out. So what do I mean? Well, the plan to silence dissent is now a bipartisan effort building upon the crackdown on anti-war student protests of last year. Mr. Trump's promise to deport international students who support Palestinian causes is more than just bluster, it turns out. You see, it's a chilling harbinger of the repression to come. That includes you, by the way. The House has already passed a bill allowing the Trump administration to declare nonprofits terrorist supporters. Nonprofits terrorist supporters. Gee, I wonder what public radio station you listen to that might be a nonprofit. Do you work for a nonprofit? Do you think charities are actually useful? Well, as Trump's administration takes shape, whether it's shaped more like a boner or a warehouse bordello, if the endless hearings and news reports of myriad sexual peccadillos are to be believed, I believe they are to be believed, we're going to see dissent punished by deportations, gulags, or internments. And if you're a Mayflower family like mine, I'm not sure if Chuck and Camilla is going to be welcoming back deported Puritan descendants at this point. Many of our great-grandfathers fought authoritarians abroad. They fought authoritarianism abroad, and they fought against those who would stifle dissent, those who would crush opposition, those who would speak truth, crush truth to power. And in the realm of speaking truth to power, let me introduce Sophie Hurwitz. She is an editorial fellow covering politics and social movements at Mother Jones. Previously, Sophie covered education and the criminal legal system for the St. Louis American and worked as a fact checker for the New York Magazine. Her latest is the plan to silence dissent, which you can find online at motherjones.com. Sophie Hurwitz, welcome to Rethinking Heroes.
Thanks for having me.
We are very glad to have you here today because this is going to be first-time news for many. Of course, many should be reading Mother Jones 24 hours a day, but it's not yet in their diet as far forward as it should be. So we're going to change that little appetite right here, right now. Let's talk about President Trump, who is broad crackdown. It's ready to implement, like meeting civil disobedience with increased force and prohibiting many forms of public assembly. Your Mother Jones investigation, an excellent reportage, has brought light to something many people had no idea had been percolating in the background. I think your audio is muted, it seems.
I don't think so. I just wasn't sure entirely what the question was.
In short, let me redo the question. Let me turn it into a question.
Please.
Your reportage talks about severe penalties for civil disobedience, public assembly meeting. People didn't know this was happening in the background unless they had heard about or read about Project 2025. The House has made a move to institutionalize this, memorialize it, make it real. Here we are. Tell us what you know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So just focusing in on this one bill that's gotten a lot of buzz lately, HR 9495, it's known as the Nonprofit Killer Bill. This bill is likely to, if passed, be used to crush dissent by taking away nonprofit status from organizations that are designated by the Secretary of the Treasury as terrorist supporting groups. And there's been a lot of fear in the past week that under Trump, that could mean basically anybody that Trump doesn't like. So that includes, I think you were talking about earlier, nonprofit news outlets, for example. So this bill passed the House 2 nights ago, and it is, forgive me, this bill passed the House yesterday. It's been a long week.
Yes, and there's still more to go, apparently.
And there's still more to go, yeah. And now it's going to go to the Senate. Now, I don't think it will pass under the current Senate. Next Senate, that could be a different question. And that's really just only one tiny part of how activists, how folks who are interested in protest in whatever shape are kind of trying to figure out what's going to happen under the next Trump administration.
So this upcoming president, he actually fulfills promises. So if you gave him a lot of money, you get a lot of, say, cabinet positions or a lot of exposure toward the American public and generally access to the Treasury. Otherwise, why would anyone bother really in government? I mean, seriously, pardon me for my being snide and a cynic at the moment, but I woke up that way today after thinking about what is really happening out there. What did Donald Trump promise to a group of donors regarding students who protest?
Well, he promised to deport them, which I think it's important to note here that it is still illegal to deport U.S. citizens or permanent residents. But he promised that he would basically deal with the issue of specifically pro-Palestinian anti-war protesters by deporting them. And I think that it's important to note here that there have been some attempts to do that already under Biden. So it's not like, he's just speaking out of some like grandiose idea. He's speaking out of like a framework that already existed. And I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't acknowledge that this is somewhat bipartisan, right? I spoke to this one student, Momodou Tal. He's at Cornell University, and Cornell attempted to cancel his student visa for protesting, which is effectively a deportation. Now, there was major pushback to this. People were like, hey, you're not going to just deport a student for disagreeing with you. And then that didn't end up happening, but it was extremely close. And so I think that Trump is looking at what has happened under Biden, at this crackdown on student protests during the encampments that already happened under Biden, and thinking, yeah, okay, absolutely, I can kind of use that as a jumping off point.
It's interesting, Sophie Hurwitz, with Mother Jones, when we think about Biden having done that, that was revealed by Mother Jones, but certainly it wasn't on the CBS Evening News or the ABC, or did Anderson Cooper or anyone else even look at it. So this is first-time news for many people. And in the chilling prospect of the upcoming administration, we have to remember the previous one was also fairly naughty as well. So this is baked into the government in many ways. One side has way more ambition to pull this thing into full Technicolor from watercolor. And that's what we're talking about. Cornell University, one of America's top educational facilities in the food chain, up there with all the other Ivy Leagues. These have always been places traditionally where students are taught to open their minds. They're taught critical thinking. They're taught to ask questions, to wonder, to examine. And all of that, this is going to put a chilling effect, I would think, at the university level for anyone to ask anything without maybe getting in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Some earlier reporting I did actually kind of spoke to that. I looked into different schools' new protest policies that they implemented over the summer. I ended up tracking down literally dozens of different universities that had changed the way they regulate protest between, May of last year and now September. So while the students are away for the summer, a lot of these schools, often like under pressure from the Department of Education, they started regulating protest more. Sometimes, it would be relatively standard time, place, manner regulation. So like, here is the area of campus in which we expect large outdoor gatherings to be held. And then sometimes it was kind of some really random stuff. Like there was one school that this sticks in my head that they banned non-permitted uses of certain acoustic instruments outdoors, such as trumpets and violins, which made me think, okay, like who's the student that was playing violin loud enough to become like a disciplinary issue? But anyways, I think that it's important to, when you're thinking about like these school disciplinary things, remember that school disciplinary systems are at some level connected with like the actual criminal legal system, right? And Mamadou Tall at Cornell, the student who almost got deported, is a really good example of that, because, you know, he started out as like a school disciplinary case, and then that escalated into something that ended up rather beyond what we think of as the school's jurisdiction, right?
Wow. Well, when you think that Thomas Jefferson played a violin, he would have gotten a baton to the side of the head and told to please move off the lawn. We're talking right now to Sophie Hurwitz, editorial fellow covering politics and social movements at Mother Jones. She's covered education and the criminal legal system for the St. Louis American, worked as a fact checker for New York Magazine. Her latest is the plan to silence dissent, which you can find online at motherjones.com. Cary Harrison with you from Los Angeles, reminding you can catch this as a live streaming video simply by going to rethinkingheroes.com and watching it on anything with a chip and a signal. We're taking a look at what dissent looks like, and it's not only just on college campuses, but any nonprofit 501c3 that might be on the side of not having war, or who's to say how it suddenly gets classified and looked at, could be declared, if it does pass the House under the next Senate, if it stays alive, a terrorist organization, which is a great way to shut down pretty much everything. Let's talk for a second, Sophie Hurwitz, about the Heritage Foundation. We all know them as the ultimate author of Project 2025, and they have Project Esther. Esther is not a name made up because somebody's grandmother was called that. It actually comes from real history. Project Esther of the Heritage Foundation, how it's connected to Trump's agendas against pro-Palestinian activists.
For sure. So Project Esther, it's this 33-page report. It sort of positions itself as an anti-Semitism report, which is great. But in fact, it ends up functioning more as a framework for silencing pro-Palestinian and anti-war protesters and anti-war dissenters, and doesn't really address Jewish people much at all, which is pretty odd in a plan that is ostensibly against anti-Semitism. I've read through the whole thing, and as you read through it, it kind of becomes clear that this framework is not really meant to do anything to like improve the lives of Jewish people really at all. It's just meant to take down the pro-Palestine movement in the US. The framework, the pamphlet, says that it can do this in, I want to say it says 12 to 24 months. I might be slightly misremembering, but the way that it outlines to do this is pretty simple. First of all, it wants to get various pro-Palestinian student groups declared as terrorist supporting organizations. Then it hopes to kind of like influence discourse on college campuses, sow division between those groups. The actual Project Esther report has all of these like kind of remarkable looking little diagrams about like, you know, here's how we can divide and conquer. And Project Esther also brings up, you guessed it, deporting activists who are part of what it calls the quote Hamas support network. This is a made up term. It's not what any activists are calling themselves. Nobody's saying that I'm a Hamas support network member. But they're saying that, okay, we can, you know, designate these organizations as Hamas support networks. And then we can get students, get non-student activists deported, and really just sort of take the teeth out of the pro-Palestine movement. And I think that it's really, really interesting to compare the language in that report to the language used in HR 9495, the nonprofit killer bill, right? Like Hamas support network, Hamas support organization transmutes into terrorist supporting organization. And so it is clear that like there are parallels in that while this plan, I don't think will really do anything to end anti-Semitism, which is a real and serious problem, it does have some influence towards these other ends.
We're going to have upcoming in Rethinking Heroes in about 20 minutes, Charlotte Dennett. She is the daughter of one of the original CIA master spies from the 1940s, has received through Freedom of Information Act maps of all the different oil routes. And it is her research, she's also an attorney, that the end game to what's going on in the Middle East is the oil off the Gaza Marine worth $6-7 billion untapped oil, and also in Lebanon, oil, maybe not. So Sophie Hurwitz, sort of along that line of questioning from a slightly different angle. Here you have a bunch of billionaires at the top. You have guys, captains of industry, women captains of industry that are all part of Trump's cabinet now. We won't get into their sexual appetites because that would be 7 shows without taking a commercial break. But let's just talk about these people that have been placed. Why are they so terrified of people named Jason, Jared, Jennifer in college? Like a 21-year-old in flip-flops who says, blah, blah, blah. How is this the worst thing that could ever happen? Worst. And we must go after them. Seriously.
I've been trying to figure that out for many, many months now. I think a lot of it is that, many of the same folks who are like running big companies are also on the boards of these institutions. And because a lot of the students, like one of their major demands is divestment, right? And the students who were in these encampments last year, who are still trying to figure out how to organize this year, have been getting quite specific about it. Like, they've been looking into their school's specific endowments and trying to figure out, okay, so like which companies is our school like investing in? And are those the same companies that are profiting off of war? And so I think that there absolutely is like a money angle here in terms of divestment is going to be like very, very unprofitable for a lot of people if it does succeed. And that demand hasn't really made it to fruition in pretty much any context. But if it were to, there are people who would lose money off of that. And I think it's important to acknowledge that.
So really, we're all supposed to believe, we the public, that somehow school campuses with people that just went from teenager to like 20 years old are crypto anti-Semites. They've been brewing for years and it's finally come to a head, and it couldn't be more ridiculous. I mean, this is a campus full of, it is the most non-binary, non-anything, big kumbaya. We've never seen this in history. The amount of, it's okay to be whatever you are, who you are, whatever you believe, whatever you disbelieve. It's all good. Let's go have a beer. So really, it is not a cauldron of terrible things happening. But the public won't know unless they have a prism through which to look and see the different angles of who's playing what and what they get out of it. And it always seems to end up, as they said with Dick Nixon, just follow the money. And if the goal is to stop the money from being invested in bad places, at least bad in the opinion of the students, then that's the problem. But it's never mentioned in the politics, is it? It's just never mentioned. So if you're a student and you're a foreign student, you get deported. What if you're just a, 8th generation born here student? What happens to you if they can't deport you?
Well, I talked to a few lawyers last week, and I'm not a lawyer, but I can summarize the advice that I was given. I think that the folks who I spoke with said that, honestly, domestic students, especially, like you said, if there was an 8th generation, whatever, students who have citizenship here are at less risk. And one of the lawyers I spoke with was basically like, well, that's a good time to coalition build with your friends who might not have citizenship here. And to kind of work out who can take on what risk, right? Because, as of now, domestic students can't be deported. You can certainly be harassed. And I mean, we've seen so much harassment of students over the past year. I think of, there were like the doxing trucks that went around Harvard, I believe, that posted up giant pictures of students' faces with terrorist supporter written next to it. And I think that type of thing does take a real toll, but it's a different kind of toll from like having to physically leave a country, right? So it's all about kind of like a spectrum of risks that I don't know. I don't think any of these students should really be dealing with in the first place, but there you
Right.
go.
They're there for another purpose, really. But,
Ideally, to get an education. Yes.
well, there's that part, which when Mr. Trump removes the Department of Education, throws it back to the states, you get someone like Ron DeSantis, one of the greatest academics, thinkers, deep thinkers, a student of Plato, Socrates, Cicero, Voltaire, everybody. He can quote them backwards, upside down in their original. I'm totally being sarcastic. Deciding who gets what educate. Maybe we don't educate certain bunches of people because of the critical race theory. Like African Americans don't need to have an education. They need to work at a factory. And maybe that becomes okay. So we're really looking at yet new unfoldings of how all of this happens. And I think what you just said a minute ago was super important, which is solution. So it's enough to learn that they're after us, whatever us means, but what can we do? And what a smart thing to build an umbrella where it's not going to rain as hard. So come on in under here. This might be an easier way to do it. It reminds me of the free speech zones that were created under Attorney General under George W. Bush, John Ashcroft. And free speech zones were where people could go protest a mile away from anything that was important or there were TV cameras. So basically, do you see that field over there? Do you see the rusted Chevy Impala behind the fence? That is a free speech zone. Go in there. And that's what people did. And they knew that if they didn't do it in there, they could be arrested as terrorists. So here we are, a rerun, history repeating itself again. And one final question to you, Sophie Hurwitz. You're in a business where what you publish, what you print, what you research, who you talk to is going to be considered particularly untoothsome and unpopular politically at the moment. We're rethinking you as a hero. You do this at your peril in many ways.
Well, I don't think that I am particularly imperiled compared to many other people, but thank you. I mean, at the end of the day, like it's a job. It's a job I like to do, and I'm lucky to do it, and I hope to keep doing it. But yeah, that was very kind of you.
Well, it's accurate, having been in the crosshairs of this kind of fun for many years. We are so happy to have you aboard. Really, very much looking forward to having you back with some of your next stories. Sophie Hurwitz is an editorial fellow covering politics and social movements at Mother Jones. She's covered education and the criminal legal system for the St. Louis American, worked as a fact checker for New York Magazine. Her latest is The Plan to Silence Dissent, which you can find online at motherjones.com. Cary Harrison with you. This is Rethinking Heroes, rethinkingheroes.com, where you can get our free newsletter, and you'll get a copy of this show and every other show in our archives, typically found on Substack, along with transcripts, so you can read not only the gist of everything you've just heard, but when we do take live calls, the callers always, that is the radish in the middle of the chocolate cake, if you ever wanted one. So just reminding you to get that. Coming up, we are going to be taking your calls a little later in the show because so much is going on in your life connected to this. And I want to get your fixes for a truly, seemingly unnavigable future. But on the other side, in a minute, we're going to talk to Charlotte Dennett, the daughter of the first CIA operative. She has received his original maps through Freedom of Information Acts that show the oil routes, and has concluded, also as an attorney, that the reason for Gaza and the reason for Lebanon is not religious, but oil. All that in a sec.
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.
Listen while it's still legal.
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.
All right. Welcome back to Rethinking Heroes, RethinkingHeroes.com. Well, as the iron heel of authoritarianism descends upon us, and when we do get to Charlotte Dennett, we'll pause and bring her on for just a moment to talk about oil. But right now, let's talk about what we just heard. As that iron heel of authoritarianism descends upon us, an administration brazenly threatens to punish dissent with deportation and prison. The Bill of Rights, that tattered relic of a bygone era, it seems, and it's lying in tatters, isn't it, for many of us? So do we meekly surrender our liberty, or do we flash our iPhone screens against the dying light of students? Those of you who have inherited the mantle of rebellion, how will you exercise your right to free speech? Will you cower before the epidemic apparatchiks, or will you challenge the orthodoxies of the day? Veterans, you who have fought for freedom's hallowed halls, how will you defend the very rights you've already bled for? Will you stand idly by as they've stripped away, or will you raise your voices in defiance? And when I say you, I mean me, I mean all of us. I've talked to more than a dozen people who literally vomited the day after the election. People are in a state of serious freak out. There seems to be no leadership or calming force out there. Where is the opposition, which would be the Democratic Party? We don't have any other things. We really don't have a Green Party. We don't have an independent party. We are just left with, chocolate ice cream, vanilla ice cream. Yes, but I want strawberry. I'm sorry, we don't serve that here in politics. It's strawberry or vanilla. So the chocolate one, the vanilla is just not doing anything out there, or so people say. Where is that calming force? I'd like to hear your thoughts and ideas for holding this democracy experiment. Your Harrison hotlines are open right now at 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. And let's hear the most fabulous piece of music ever written by the Kinsey Six, S-I-C-K-S, I Wanna Be a Republican.
I wanna be a Republican. I'm tired of doing what I should. Wanna do what I can. Grab as much as I can. Keep it all for me. Cause a life is a party, and the grand old party is a party where I wanna be.
Lower taxes are God's plan. Global warming helps my tan. Give a gun to every man to protect us from non-Aryans. When you know you're better than all those non-Americans, there's no need to join the Klan. Just become Republican. I'm tired of thinking about you when it's all about me. With values strong, they fight the obscene. Now I found a place where I am embraced for being selfish and mean. Like things as they used to be. Miss the old Confederacy. Government should let us be, but not your body. Tired of diversity. Defund universities. Set the corporations free. Come and join the GOP. God bless America. Do-do-do-do. Bland as I love. Do-do-do-do-do. Make her whiter. Blue-eyeder. To the right with 1,000 points of light from above. I wanna be a Republican. I wanna be a Republican.
They are brilliant. I think they have vanished. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they really came around during the Bush administration. A bunch of, ready for this, drag queens that could actually sing, and they wrote pithy political songs. Absolutely wonderful. It looks like Charlotte Dennett is here with no video, and this, of course, is a video stream. Well, how exciting that's going to be, at least on my side. There we go. It's on. Cool. Great. All right. Cary Harrison with you. This is Rethinking Heroes, rethinkingheroes.com. Don't forget, you can get our free newsletter. You can also catch the live video stream by going to rethinkingheroes.com, clicking on the link of your choice to be able to see it on anything with a chip and a signal. It also holds archives, as does your free newsletter, where you're going to also get the kind of stuff we can't do on the radio. And as we do know that the next FCC chairman is one of the authors of none other than Project 2025. So for all the months that you heard officially, I don't know anything about Project 2025. Nobody. Yes, the ones that wrote it are now in charge. It is being implemented, just as we heard a minute ago. And with the FCC, it is being implemented. And what do you think's on the chopping block? What nonprofit organizations like public radio are going to be? Well, we're going to have some real conversations upcoming as long as we can, right? So I want you just to stay aware of that and be aware. Right now, let's go to Charlotte Dennett. Let's talk a little bit. Let me just tee her up. What we've got here is a situation where the Middle East is on fire. We just learned that if you even want to mention Gaza, you could be called some kind of terrorist sympathizer. The public has been convinced for well over a year that this is somehow a religious problem. Sure, the little mammals, like at you and me level, we might be told it's because they believe in that, we believe in this, and we know that we're right. But what's really going on behind the scenes, that's why we're bringing in Charlotte Dennett. She is the daughter of one of the first CIA master chiefs. She has written a book. She's an attorney, and she's pointing out now that really this is all about oil. And Charlotte Dennett, I want to welcome you to Rethinking Heroes.
Well, thank you. Can you see me all right?
I see you beautifully.
All right. That's not my place in the background. I don't know where you picked up that background. Some person once made a comment.
I think you picked that up. It looks like your software put in a virtual background, but people listening on radio, like, I don't care. So yeah, it looks good. Okay, and it's a beautiful fake couch, and I love the grand piano on the left.
The grand piano. I got criticized for that.
So let's get down and dirty here. Your father was one of the first master spies in the CIA. His plane mysteriously went down after he disclosed some things. Walk us through in 3 easy minutes the history of your father, the CIA, why it made sense for you to get involved so that people can understand what's coming.
Well, actually, his plane crashed a few months before the CIA was created. He was with the Central Intelligence Group, which was the immediate predecessor, and he ended up first went to Lebanon in 1943 with the OSS, America's first wartime spy agency. But he was considered the first master spy. And the CIA would later recognize him, even though he died before the CIA was created. He was posted to Lebanon, and the reason why I was born in Beirut, and the reason I eventually started looking into his death is because his last mission was to Saudi Arabia. And the purpose of the mission was to track the route of the Trans-Arabian pipeline that was going to carry incredibly valuable oil across the Saudi peninsula over to the Eastern Mediterranean. And apparently its terminal point was initially considered to be either Lebanon, where actually it did end up, or Haifa, Palestine. So that got me really interested. And I would eventually write a book called Follow the Pipelines. And on the cover of the book, in fact, I show a picture of the map, and I'm just going to show it to you now. Oh, I guess you can't see that. All right, that's not going to work.
Let me explain for people just listening and not watching. Put the book closer to the camera. Your virtual background is eating everything.
Yeah, it's
never mind.
Never mind. That's not going to work.
Suffice it to say.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So what I learned is I sued the CIA, and one of the documents I got from it was heavily redacted, but it was his marching orders in 1943, called an analysis of work. And one of the sentences that was not redacted for some reason said that his mission, his primary mission, was, quote unquote, to protect the oil at all costs. So that really got me interested. And then I did some research in the New York Times and found out that this pipeline was a huge deal. This was in 1943, and that it was full of intrigue. And I had this great quote, I think I can get it from you, that said that one of the issues of this pipeline, and it was a major story, it was a Sunday edition story. One of the key factors of the pipeline, oh, I can't even show you that. Okay. It said, and I'm reading, this is from the New York Times, protection of that investment and the military and economic security that it represents inevitably will become one of the prime objectives of American foreign policy in the area, which already has become a pivot of world politics and one of the main focal points of rivalry between East and West. And so once I got onto that, and I sued the CIA, I began to understand that getting the oil at all costs became a meme throughout the whole history of the Middle East conflict, right up to the present. And the main reason, which people don't often hear, that is not explained in the media, is because oil remains the fuel of the military. And all great powers
The
learned
the U.S. military is the single largest customer of gasoline on Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big lessons that all great powers learned, both during World War I and World War II, is that Germany lost both wars because its lorries, its planes, its tanks ran out of gas. So you can't have that happening if you aspire to be a great power. And then there's also just the whole basic of who gets the oil first. So there's tremendous competition. And one of the things I learned from my father's papers is when he was sent to Lebanon in 1943, he wasn't spying on the Germans because they had already been eliminated from Lebanon. He was spying on our allies. The French, the British, and the Russians, and
about who's going to get that oil. I'm just going to refocus us a little bit in the interest of time, and we do have some phone calls that we're going to get to. There's a CIA wing named after your father, by the way. So he is as big as anything could possibly be as far as the CIA is concerned. He is the guy that did these original maps. You got them through Freedom of Information Acts. Let's jump into, so this whole Gaza, this whole Lebanon issue, all of this slaughter and carnage and mayhem and whatever side you're on, you think you're rooting for football teams, but actually there's something entirely different happening here.
Yes. Well, yeah, it began in the year 2000 when oil and natural gas was discovered off the coast of Gaza and Israel. And in 2010, a larger find was found off the coast of Israel, and it's called the Leviathan Field. And I really recommend that your viewers pull out a map, and you'll see the importance of the whole Eastern Mediterranean. These are all offshore fields. And I once learned when I was a reporter in Lebanon in the mid-70s, I was told that Lebanon was the gateway to the Middle East. But I later learned that from an oil company's perspective, it's the gateway to Middle East oil, because there are these major pipelines that were sent from Iraq and from Saudi Arabia to the coast. This was the best way to get the oil up to Europe. Nowadays, because the Israelis have not just the Israelis, that discoveries have been made of oil and natural gas worth, get this, $500 billion worth of oil and natural gas. There's competition on who's going to own the fields. And one of the things I learned was that Netanyahu, or his conservative supporters in government launched 2 different wars before the 10,000, the recent one in Gaza. And the purpose of them was to prevent the Gazans from getting control. They had a right to the offshore oil, and Israel did everything to prevent it. And it's in my book, Follow the Pipelines. But the reasons they gave is that none of the revenues from the oil was going to help improve their economies. Instead, it was going to go to terrorism. That was the argument. And I have a map that shows the extent of these fines. And I made a prediction that this would become a tinderbox. That prediction was made 2 years ago, and look at where we are now.
So
And
let's augur the future a little bit. We're going to have to pause. We are going to jump to the phones. Who gets this oil? So we're now looking at what, $5-6 billion off the Gaza Marine. We're looking at more in Lebanon. I didn't quite get the number that you estimate off in Lebanon.
500 billion off the whole coast, the whole area, Eastern Mediterranean. $500 billion worth.
500 billion. So $500 billion of oil is sitting there, which of course is job security for everybody who's there in charge, pulling the trigger. Who gets that oil? Originally, it was Israel who said, no oil gets tapped because all of it's going to go to terrorism. But now there is no such thing really. If the oil gets tapped, who gets that oil?
Well, Israel wants the oil exclusively. And what it wants to do is to build an energy corridor, which would consist of pipelines that exploit the oil and send it up to Europe, which is now energy hungry because of the war in Ukraine. People may have remembered the sabotage of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And so Europe was getting its energy cheaply from Russia, but after the war in Ukraine, they started frantically looking elsewhere. And back in June 2023, the European Union signed a memorandum of understanding with Israel to import gas from the Leviathan fields. So the point is, though, you can't have a pipeline infrastructure built if you don't have international financing. And the banks are not going to fund this infrastructure project as long as there's unrest. Again, we must protect the oil at all costs. If there's any unrest there, you can't protect the oil. So what's the solution? Well, Netanyahu's solution is to wipe out Gaza, to de-radicalize it, to demilitarize it, to destroy Gaza and the people in it, as well as Hamas. And now, of course, they're moving up to Lebanon to do the same thing. Some people are saying there's genocide in Lebanon is going to happen. And then you look at who is standing by and continue to supply arms despite the genocide. And I mean, some people must say, how can they do that? How can the Biden administration do that? And what I'm saying, there's a bigger end game. They seem to think that by wiping this place out and then redeveloping it, that's going to solve the problem. And it's not. It's just created a whole new generation of angry Palestinians and Lebanese. This is not going to solve the problem. But Netanyahu is pursuing it. One reason is he wants to stay out of jail. And of course, Trump wants to stay out of jail too. And the two are allied. So what I'm seeing is a very dangerous time. They have very big plans for the region. Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump,
Jared Kushner.
Yeah, he said recently that Gaza would be nice waterfront property. How sweet, right? And
well, if you're a developer,
yeah. And there's another plan.
It turns out.
Pardon me?
He is, it turns out, period.
He is what? I didn't hear the last point.
He is a developer.
Oh, yeah. He's a developer.
Yes.
Right.
It takes one to know one. Yeah. Well, it's not a coincidence.
Yeah. Well,
and so is his father-in-law.
At what cost? It's terrible.
Yeah. Well, this is fascinating, Charlotte Dennett. I want to thank you so much. I know there's going to be more as things continue to unfold, as Lebanon starts to articulate itself as an even larger nightmare, and you're going to have more perspective and more inside information. We really appreciate your coming on here. Give us a quick glimpse again at the name of your book and where we can see it.
It's called Follow the Pipelines. Follow the Pipelines, Uncovering the Mystery of a Lost Spy and the Deadly Politics of the Great Game for Oil. And that's what's going on right now. The people, massive numbers of people are dying so that big developers and oil companies can get their way. It's a terrible tragedy. And there's a new agreement called the India Middle East Corridor, which also involves building a pipeline, a so-called natural gas pipeline that's going to also connect to Haifa and cross Saudi Arabia along the same route of the original Trans-Arabian pipeline that my father was involved in overseeing. It was closed in 48. Now they're building a new pipeline. Follow the pipelines. If you do that, you'll understand all these conflicts in the Middle East.
Thank you. What an excellent primer. Appreciate you coming on. We'll definitely talk to you again. Charlotte Dennett, being the daughter of the original CIA master spy before the CIA, then really into that whole new world, and has followed the pipes, has written a book about it. You can see it with your own eyes. We've just heard about all the different agreements that have been made to exploit oil by U.S. companies, drilling, pumping, and flowing, and all that to relieve Europe of having to be attached to Putin. So this is the chess game, the workaround, the backdoor solution, but unfortunately is not only expensive in human lives, it's just expensive, and it's going to cause a lot more drama. And we'll learn about that later. Thank you again, Charlotte Dennett. Coming up when we open the Harrison hotlines, which we already have G on hold, we have Larry in San Pedro. We're going to have many more of you at 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK. We've heard first about, with explicit clarity, how the iron heel of authoritarianism has descended upon us, an administration brazenly planning to punish dissent with deportation, even prison, students who've inherited the mantle of rebellion. How are they going to exercise their right of free speech in the future? Veterans who have fought for the right to have rights have already put skin in the game. What are their recommendations? And knowing that all of this, remember, the punishments are for talking about Gaza. We now know what's in Gaza that anyone even cares about to do what's happening there. It can't be that you suddenly don't believe in this, or your God is greater than that, or less than that, or this or that, or whatever. Oil, baby, oil, and lots of it. Your calls are next.
We are in complete control. We are
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.
Listen, well, it's still legal.
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.
And it is Rethinking Heroes, RethinkingHeroes.com. Don't forget, you can catch a live video stream of this. You'll be able to see the callers, too, particularly sexy and attractive, simply by going to RethinkingHeroes.com, getting our free newsletter, and picking the link of your choice for any streaming service, which, of course, also includes the KPFK Facebook website, which is also a place where we're live streaming right now, too. We're taking your calls at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735, and looking at the mayhem and what we've actually just learned today. Let's first go to Larry in San Pedro. You're on Rethinking Heroes.
Good morning, Cary. Can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
I am one of your 80-year-olds. And before I make my comment about the 14th Amendment, Section 3, I want to ask you how many people are listening on all the various platforms to your program this morning.
We know that it's probably up to 700,000 to 800,000.
Wow, that's quite a bit.
So be articulate now and don't say a naughty word.
Okay, I will not. The ruling made by the High Court is illegal, unconstitutional, and any officer of the United States who has participated in a insurrection cannot run for office. So we have to recognize that that decision cannot stand. We have to find a way to take it down. And as far as I can see at this point, the only way to do that is to have Biden arrest Mr. Trump and incarcerate him. And your comments on that, please, sir.
All right. Thank you so much, Larry. Well, you know how dangerous it is for any of us to comment on anything at this point, even though January 6th or the 20th hasn't really rolled around yet. Biden can do whatever he wants. Clearly, a case could be made that breaking the law, knowing about it in advance, doing nothing about it, would also make you, as the sitting president, in some way complicit. So it's hard to say. I do not want to be, I want to be careful because I also have to observe the license of this network, which is going to be on the chopping block under the new FCC chair. So that's why I'm asking you guys to do it, because you can get away with it way better. So I want your solutions. But I think you just gave us one, Larry. Don't even have to read between the lines on that one. I very much appreciate it. Let's go next to G in Glendale. You're on Rethinking Heroes.
Mr. Cary Harrison, good morning. Good to talk to you again. I'm going to try to hurry up in case we got Brother Carlos on hold. He didn't get to get in last week. I've been trying to run two things by you the past 3 months, but because of pledge drives, I've been knocked out. One of them I want to ask you about, but next week, hopefully, one of my enemies, one of your colleagues, not on Pacifica, I want to see if you worked with him back in the day. The other one, suggestion for a guest. You know who this person is, worldwide famous. I'm sure your long career, Air, so-called America, you might even be a friend of yours. You interviewed him. He dropped the book. Let me set this up before. He dropped a book years ago that was made into a flick. I'll tell you about it in a second. But I think he just dropped a new book 3 months ago. He was a guest on Pacifica on two different shows. One on Eric Mann's show, which was repeated another time, and one was either on your colleague on Monday mornings on Pacifica, Sonia Barrett, or the music host on the musical Village. I forgot.
Yeah.
Maggie LePeak. I was not
know who this person is.
Anyway, the first book was made into a flick, starring a gentleman who looks exactly like the kid, yours truly, who was born on the 3rd of July. The name of the flick, the name of the actor, Mr. Mapper the Fourth, made a flick called Born on the 4th of July. I'm talking about Tom Cruise. Ron Kovic. I think he just dropped a new joint.
We had Ron Kovic.
How you
I'm just going to jump in, my friend, and rescue you. We had Ron Kovic on Rethinking Heroes. He was well before everyone else, and talked about his book, he admitted something he had never admitted even in his book, uniquely here. So we've had him on. I would have him on again for sure. And you're welcome to go into the archives and find that entire interview. Just go to rethinkingheroes.com. It's right there, unless you have an alternate thing to talk about with him. All right, cool. Well, that's the good news. So you don't have to wait for that to happen. It is available for you 24/7 by simply going to rethinkingheroes.com. Let's go to Michelle. You're in Los Angeles. Welcome to Rethinking Heroes.
I thank you. I appreciate it. Just really quickly, your last.
Well, Michelle, I hope we didn't just lose you. I think we just did. It sounds like there were two overlaid lines, probably hard lines. If you want to call in, we'll see if we can squeeze you back in. We are running to the end of the clock here with about 3 more minutes, but I'd love to get you back on, Michelle, if you're still available. It has been quite a learning experience today because we got the real skinny on what we were told would happen with Project 2025, and we now find out that much of the cabinet is being cast with the very authors of Project 2025, including the FCC, and including many of the authors are now finding themselves at the top. We've already had the House vote to silence dissent by making anyone who says really anything about Gaza, I suppose if it's flavored this way or that way, it doesn't really matter. It's like it's not happening. Look away, look away. We find out that this is going to be the law of the land, that dissent will be punishable in a variety of different ways. If you are a student or an immigrant, you will be deported. There it is. It's done. If you are an American citizen who's been here for maybe multiple generations, it will be slightly easier, and we don't know what that punishment will be yet. We find out why many of those punishments later from Charlotte Dennett, who explained that there is $500 billion, $500 billion worth of untapped oil in that whole area. And the oil companies are going after it, and they're going to sell it to Europe. So anyone who gets in the way of that, like the Gazans are in the way of their own oil, and the Lebanese are now in the way of their own oil, students who are in the way of investing in that oil because they want to divest from those oil opportunities, they will also have to go away. It's a very cynical Machiavellian plan. I think we can get you on for 1 quick minute, Michelle. Glad you're back. Welcome to Rethinking Heroes.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to, I found Charlotte quite interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading her book. I just may have missed it, but I don't understand her. We all obviously understand that oil and gas is one of the big variables in wars and geopolitics, for sure. But I just don't understand how she's putting in the Hamas Terrorism Act on October 7th and all of the hostages with this whole point that this was all about Netanyahu going for the gas.
I think what she's done is pulled the camera back. So there's always explanations as to why this, why that. Sure, all this did happen. Horrible. No doubt about it. What she's discovered is the end game. So sometimes you use the pretext, like 9/11 was the pretext to go into Afghanistan, to go into Iraq, that had nothing to do with 9/11. But what do we have all over Iraq right now? Pump jacks. We are pumping that oil. Their oil is now our oil, using the pretext of another situation to go in and get the big job done. All that you'll remember from PNAC, the Project for the New American Century, drafted in 1997, published widely by all the neocons, Wolfowitz, swinging Dick Cheney and Halliburton. Everybody had their fingers in that particular pie. So that's what she's doing. She's saying all of this stuff is the pretext to get the job done. What is the job? $500 billion worth of oil yet to be exploited.
But in order for this, pullback to work, then these sort of random acts of terrorism just sort of line up. And then we're saying that everyone who wants the oil is just going to swoop in whenever one of these horrible acts happens and make it the reason that they've done it.
Could be. We've seen that throughout history. I have to run. We are so out of time. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Okay.
More will be revealed by more people that know. Thank you so much for joining this week. Cary Harrison with you. This is Rethinking Heroes.
Listen, well, it's still legal.
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.